Welcome to another episode of the PS We Expire podcast. I'm your host, Morgan Motzinger. Today, I am talking with my sister, Geneva, on this episode because we are sharing some pretty personal insights into religion and spirituality. So what better person to talk to about this than someone who also grew up in my household with the same set of beliefs, the same kind of spiritual cultural environment. And I do want to start this episode by saying that there are many, many positive things that come with belonging to a religious community and a belief system that is shared with many people in the community. As I began to really have some serious questions about my faith and the belief system that I grew up in, I became more aware of a lot of very damaging messages and experiences that people have had within like a fundamental evangelical belief system and culture. So while I both acknowledge the harm that has been done and acknowledge the beautiful, amazing things that come with belonging to a religious organization or community, I just want to share today with you my own personal experience, what it has been like to navigate the questions and the doubts and to understand more about myself in the process. And so Geneva and I'm so excited to introduce you to her today because she is one of my best friends, but she also is a person who is so open and caring and kind and playful in the world. And so I'm excited for you to get to hear her insight and her wisdom as we talk about this kind of delicate topic for many, many people, religion and spirituality. So please enjoy this episode of the PS We Expire podcast. And if you find that this is helpful to you in maybe understanding your own spiritual growth, or if you know that a friend could benefit from this, please share it with them. And more than anything, my big message when it comes to talking about many of these things, but in particular this topic of spirituality and religion today, is that you would understand that you are not alone, that the doubts that you have, the questions that you have, the searching that you're doing, the experimentation that you're doing, you're not alone as you're trying to discover what works for you, what is true for you, and what really contributes to you having a positive relationship with others, with yourself, and with God, with Source, with the universe. And so my hope today is that this would be an encouraging episode for you. And if you do listen to this and you want to go ahead and share it on social media, please tag me Morgan_Motzinger so that I know that this was a helpful and important conversation for you as well. Thank you, and looking forward to talking with you today. So your sentence was you were thinking about when you exited, what led up to that?
Yeah, and I think I feel like a lot of my questions were what our particular religion and framework wasn't able to include. So I feel like my branching out or looking elsewhere came from not so much like what I was upset about within, but it felt like it wasn't I just had so many questions. So yeah, things weren't adding up. Things weren't making sense. And so, yeah, and the more I asked other people questions and the more I listened, the more I felt like, yeah.
What types of questions did you feel like you wanted to ask and that you either weren't allowed to or you weren't getting the answers that you wanted?
I remember asking a lot about, other places and countries people that would never hear of Jesus or even necessarily know about God, and trying to make that match with what we were told that, to go to heaven, someone had to believe in Jesus as their savior, and not really understanding how that could make sense when there were I mean, so many people that would not ever hear about that. That didn't really make sense to me. And I feel like the answer I was given was that, well, I just don't, you know, understand because I'm a human,
Mm.
you know.
I feel like that was the answer for a lot of our questions was like, God's ways are higher than our ways. Our puny human brains and logic can't, understand
Even
the
fathom.
big like master plan. And I have had many people ask me, why did I leave? And the one of the pieces of doctrine or theology that didn't make sense to me was hell. It was like, and kind of along the same lines as you, is like, if there are people that never hear about Jesus and they're destined for this eternal torment, like that seems so unjust. That seems
Yeah.
so unloving. Not seems, it is so unloving, so unjust that it didn't make sense. Like it doesn't make sense for who I was told that God was for that to even be an option. And if God is all powerful, like why is it such an offense if people don't believe in him? And I it still doesn't make sense to me. It's like like they say, like tit for tat, or like let the punishment fit the crime. And I'm like, okay, here you've got a human who you've already admitted has, limited ability to understand God,
Mm.
and we can only think about things in a certain way, and if things don't add up, it's because it's our fault, not his. And you've got, at most, for the first time in human history, really, people are living as long as they are. So at most you've got like 100 years, and then you're going to say, because of the behavior or the beliefs within that 100 years, you then get eternity of conscious torment. That is so, that does not make any sense at all. Like that punishment does not fit the crime at all. And that was another area where people are like, well, you have to understand that like God is holy and I'm like, what? But still, like, me not believing in God doesn't detract from God at
Mm.
all, because that's impossible. So that was like one of the first dominoes for me, was like, hell doesn't make sense. And in addition to that, it was taught to us that what it was either heaven or hell,
Yeah.
and that other beliefs about what happens after you die are not only, they're wrong, but you can't even really investigate them. And when I was discussing, this struggle that I had with this idea of eternal torment with a pastor, and he told me that even within Christian theology, there's 4 different ways to understand this concept of hell, or to translate or interpret these passages that seem to indicate what happens after death. I was like, wait, what? There's
Mm.
4. Like, why wasn't I ever presented with options of
Yeah.
what I wanted to believe? It was never presented as like that your beliefs are a choice. They are, this is how it is, and either you can choose to not believe it, but if you choose to not believe it, like, you're screwed for all eternity,
Yeah.
So there wasn't ever any like gray area. And when I was told that there were 4 ways to think about hell, I was like, why would I choose then to believe the way that I was believing? And then I think it just blew the lid off of that, because then I understood that everything that I believed was a choice.
Uh,
So if I don't want to believe that about hell, and there actually is like supporting evidence to believe differently, what other things are there that I believe that not only don't feel good to me, but also don't help me love and connect with other people in the way that feels most deeply meaningful and authentic to me? Then I can choose to think of those things differently too. And it just absolutely like blew everything apart. It was like, it felt like it obliterated my belief system. And not everybody who comes out of a particular way of thinking, especially in like a high demand religion, has to completely obliterate their belief system. Like,
yeah.
sometimes there's people have an ability to, examine things differently and
Yeah.
still stay within that community. But that was not the case for me. Like, I think I had to burn it to the ground and get out, and then kind of like dig through the ashes to be like, okay, what things still make sense
Mm.
to me? What still work for me?
I love that you told me that. I feel like it happened very different for me. And even hearing you say, I get to choose what I believe, is not something that I think about a lot. And that actually is so helpful for me because hmm, I think my belief transition, if you will, in relation to religion was more coming from a place of this idea that absolute truth existed.
Hmm.
And so as I started to really question and feel significant doubt, I guess you would call it, towards the religion that I was in, I felt more and more like, okay, well, this feels like this is not absolute truth. So then, well, what is absolute truth? And what happened was more, I still was hanging on to the idea that the Christianity, the religion that we were raised in, could possibly be that absolute truth somehow, like
Hmm.
somehow. And it was really only when, well, a couple things. One, when I was able to release that idea and be like, okay, maybe it's not, maybe there is some other absolute truth. And then began this years, what felt like floundering and kind of
Hmm.
at times almost frantically searching for, well, then if this is not it, well, then it has to exist in some other form. And what is that form? And that was a difficult place to exist in, but also felt better than because I'm like, okay, well, there's got to be something, and I don't think it's this, but there has to be some, some kind of absolute truth.
Hmm.
And the real freedom for me happened when I let go of that idea altogether.
Hmm.
More like, okay, what I feel the most, and I know I've told you this before, was that I was like, okay, there could be some, okay, there could still be some absolute truth or some religion or some way of thinking that is correct. And I might never know what that is, or I don't know what that is right now. But what I do believe right now is that I want to be kind. And I believe that kindness is going to be, um, I guess, the only structure that I have. And that
Hmm.
um, there was so much freedom when I let myself believe that that was enough. Yeah.
It's
And yeah.
it's like letting kindness be your compass. I've thought
Mhm.
about this question quite a lot in my transition of is it possible to create values and ethics and convictions outside of any kind of formal religious structure?
Mm,
I yeah, I do believe that it's true, but it still is difficult for my brain to go there because part of the belief system that I had was that everything nothing would ever be as good as what it would be within Christianity. So marriage couldn't be as good if it wasn't a biblical Christian marriage, or parenting or
mm,
sex or business or whatever. It was like it can only get, for anybody that's not a Christian, it can get pretty
mm,
good, but it can't be as good as doing it according to like God's blueprint. And I've really had to like work that messaging out of my subconscious where I'm not so, kind of like you said, like floundering to validate my own values and my own internal compass towards kindness, and to
mhm,
be able to trust that. Because I mean, we can talk about this at length, but part of one of the most damaging messages that we got was that at our core, at our root, we are bad,
yeah,
that we are broken, that we are sinful, that we are enemies of God. Ew, even just saying that like makes my tummy be like,
yeah,
that was such a damaging system to be brought up in, because it's like a consistent diet of, you can't trust yourself, you can't, that still small voice that's in you can't trust that. And I would layer probably on top of that being a woman and having some of the first stories taught to us about what women were like was that they are the ones who caused this shitstorm to kind of,
Yeah.
to start, and that women are easily deceived, and that they are, that they are always looking to dominate their husbands and to be the leaders or whatever, and that's not how God intended it to be. And so all of those messages have been ones that now, since kind of getting over that first hurdle of doubt and removing myself from the consistent messaging, all the time. I was reading books, I was going to church, I was doing Bible studies, I was listening to podcasts, I was listening to music that all reinforce these beliefs about myself and about the world.
Yeah.
That it wasn't until until that was obliterated and I removed myself from it, that I started to feel more clear-headed and understand some of these messages and how they were dictating the choices that I was making in my life. And there's so much to be said for how very important it is for us to become self-aware, introspective people, because otherwise, like, we're not even aware that we're living out these programs that were handed to us in childhood, when in childhood everything is true, everything is real, everything is factual, and we don't have a filter system yet to like be like, oh, this actually isn't true, or this isn't real, or this isn't helpful to me, or this isn't useful. It's like it all goes in there and says all of this is real, all of this is true. And unfortunately, for people that are born into a high demand religion, those are some of those messages of, you cannot trust yourself, you cannot trust your intuition, you cannot believe that what you feel is true.
It's such a brilliant, awful way to control people. Because if you're, unable and told that you cannot use yourself in any way to guide your ideas or ways of thinking or making decisions, then you will look somewhere else. And you look to leaders in your church, and you look to people who tell you that they know what God wants you to do.
I think you're right. It's much, much easier to anticipate people's behavior when they all subscribe to the same belief system. So one of the, quote unquote dangers of people using their internal guidance is that that's not always predictable. And people are going to make decisions sometimes that are harmful or perceived as harmful when they're really not. I think it is really indicative of part of our evolutionary wiring to know what the people around us are going to do, how you can rely on them, have a shared commitment to a goal, have a shared understanding of what your place is and what to expect and what they can expect from you. And I mean, we see this even outside of any kind of like religious systems. We see this as a whole when there is so much polarity, because people want to know that they can trust the people around them and they can anticipate what their behavior is going to be. And it's like, if I know that you and I have the same beliefs, then okay, like maybe I don't have to watch my back. Maybe like you'll help watch my back for me. And it's like this safety system that kicks into place that forces us into this black and white kind of binary thinking. And unfortunately, when there's a layer of this is what God says, it becomes more and more difficult to have meaningful conversations that help us see each other as like we're all part of this shared human experience together. When it's like, when the belief system also says that what I believe is what God says, it's like, how do you continue a conversation after that?
Maybe I wonder if that's why people enjoy, I don't, but people enjoy, talking about different perspectives at the interpretations of the Bible. Like it's a way to voice ideas under that umbrella of, this is what God says.
It is funny though, like how even within those systems there is polarity, which I find so fascinating. I will share with our listeners that we grew up in, I guess I would say, like an evangelical, fundamental Christian, non-denominational, but still very evangelical church. And we grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, which means that we were the religious minority
Yeah.
and I mean, being outside of it now, I see we're actually much more alike than we thought we were. But that, I think, gave us an even like deeper sense of the like this us versus them kind of mentality, where it wasn't enough to just say you were a Christian. Like, you had to say what type of Christian you were and what you believed about certain things like baptism,
Mm,
about marriage, about homosexuality, about, you know, all of these things. Like, it almost was like, it wasn't enough to say like we both love Jesus. It was like, well, who else does your Jesus love? And if if you love
yeah.
somebody that like my Jesus doesn't love, then I have the right Jesus and you don't. So it was such a
Oh,
weird,
so interesting.
yeah, such a weird like additional cultural dynamic to how we were raised, that it made us feel very alone and also very like combative, I guess, in what we believed. And it also made us feel like everybody around us, like the stakes were so high because of what we believed about hell. It was
Mm,
like, I gotta tell people, I gotta save people, I gotta make them understand, I gotta make them choose this, I gotta make them believe this. And
yeah.
like, what a gift for us to really understand that there's no way to make anybody do anything. Like, people,
Yeah.
because people don't change for other people, they change for themselves. And
Mm,
our each of our spiritual journeys are individualistic. You know, you can have people that support you along the way into deeper discovery, but it's an inside job always, which also is much more difficult to control.
yeah.
So what are like some of
Mm.
the things that you feel like on this side of that belief system that have positively changed for you? Because you exited in college.
That have positively changed for me. You talked about like the like frantic energy with, wanting to tell people and needing to tell people and needing people to understand a certain thing. It is lovely not have that same kind of energy. I still, in other ways, really want people to see the same things I'm seeing or have,
Hmm.
when I have amazing experiences, want people to have that too, like the things I see on my walk.
Hmm.
Um, but it doesn't feel like, I mean, it's not related to where you end up eternally. So
Hmm.
it doesn't feel so pressing
A little
in
less
that way.
pressure.
Um,
It's a different kind of energy too, because it's not an energy that's driven by like fear. It's an energy that's driven by joy and
yeah,
like a shared commitment to seeing the good and beautiful things in the
yeah.
world.
I think the biggest thing, we talked about this already, but in the belief within our religious system was that we, as humans are intrinsically bad.
Mm.
And that, when Ellie was born, when I had Ellie, looking at her, fresh new baby, I knew that that was ridiculous, that idea was ridiculous. And
Mm.
just that has been really lovely to really believe that humans are good intrinsically, or, that we are at our core, we are love. And that is such a more delightful way to move through this life and exist.
Mm.
And in also, in meeting other people and in conversations and in just learning from other people and looking forward to hearing what they have to say and what I can
Hmm.
learn.
Hmm.
It's a much more pleasant way to be.
Okay, so forever, there has always been these conversations around the problem of evil, the problem of pain, the problem of suffering. And throughout history, there have been different ways to address that, different ways
Mm,
to address the very real happenings of terrible things happening, not just the things that are outside of our control, but also the terrible things that humans do to other humans.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of people that bristle at this belief that humans at their core are good. But what is helpful to me about believing that, well, number one, I'm not committed to understanding what is quote unquote true
Hmm.
when it comes to things that you literally cannot prove. I
Yeah.
mean, there are objective realities like gravity, like how matter works and all of these things, but all the things that are theories are not true. We just see that they work. That theory works right now to describe something that's happening. So the theory that people at their core are good and loved and lovable is useful to me for me to connect with people in the way that I want to. So
Yeah.
I'm not motivated like I used to be to like figure out what the truth is and to have like the safety and the sureness within what is true. It's like, is it useful to me or not? And having this belief for a long time that people at their core were evil and bad, what that did is it made me see everyone as a potential enemy
Hmm.
instead of seeing other people as at their core they are lovable and they are good. It helps me understand trauma differently. It helps me understand and ask questions about why do people perpetuate the behaviors that they do? Why do people believe what they do? And it just like love opens the floodgates for curiosity.
Hmm.
Fear always, always, always creates disconnection because fear says that there's danger here.
Yeah.
Love says it's okay for me to explore these things. It's okay for me to ask these questions. It's okay for me to see that you have a different opinion, a different way that you move through life, and that's fine. Like, that doesn't mean anything about me or my beliefs. Like, I don't need other people to validate my beliefs in the same way.
Hmm.
There is so much less like tension and angst around like hanging on to my beliefs at all costs and insisting that other people also tell me that I'm right.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. I feel like I've found again and again, and more recently in just the beautiful practice of allowing and really how much yeah, it was really surprising to me how much peace and freedom I felt when I had that realization that it's okay if I don't ever know, or if there
Hmm.
isn't objective truth, like whether or not that exists or I ever find it, that's okay. And that instead of putting me into this like wild spin, which I
Hmm.
imagined I would, it was incredibly, yeah, calming and stabilizing and freeing. Like you said, because
Hmm.
I'm not holding on to it so tight that I'm really closed off to new information or new people or new ways of thinking. It
Hmm.
allows me to just exist in a much more like a calmer way of being.
Hmm. I think what you said about kind of being in the spin cycle
Yeah.
of beliefs, that is so normal. That is so normal when people are transitioning from one way of thinking to another way of thinking. So I want people to understand that if they are there right now, that's exactly where you have to be as you are making new connections in your brain. There's this idea of like the void
Mm,
between old beliefs and new beliefs, or old perspectives, new perspectives, old life, new life, that there's this transition period that can be so desperately uncomfortable and so painful and so jarring
yeah.
that people, and it varies from person to person how long they kind of are in that space, and you you really can't rush through that process because like you said, it's like you went on that couple of years quest to try and figure out what the capital T truth was.
Yeah.
And you thought that in the surrender of that pursuit, or that, that spin cycle, that in the surrender of figuring out what absolute truth was, that the chaos would come after that, but that the chaos was happening in the pursuit of that, and the peace came after the release and the surrender.
Yeah.
And what I love about that so much is that I mean, that within Buddhism, that is what they would say reduces suffering, is the release of the attachment to things having to be a certain way, or this attachment to our belief that to the shoulds. I should have this in my life. I shouldn't have had this happen. Things should be different. Other people should believe differently. Other people should believe the same way that I believe. And every time we peel off the shoulds, or let go of the shoulds, it automatically reduces suffering. What a gift to be okay with what is happening, and saying like, yeah, this isn't like a call to not take responsibility, or to completely take our hands off of our life and are like, what will be will be.
Right.
It's not that, but it's like this shift in our mindset to say, what things do I have control over and what things don't I have control over? And the sooner that we do that, there's so much like a release of anxiety too, because we get ourselves into these cramped spaces where we are worrying about things that we don't have any control over. And when it comes to like religious beliefs, one of those things that we create so much suffering for ourselves because we want to have control over is knowing what happens to us after we die. Well, and why wouldn't you be worried about that if what you're told is it's one way or the other, and potentially you're going to be tormented forever? Why wouldn't you think about that so much? And why wouldn't you be trying to figure out how to avoid that at all costs? And the release of this attachment to having to have it figured out is what creates so much peace and freedom, because the truth is, like, none of us knows. And so I'm like, oh, okay, well, if we don't know for sure, what beliefs are helpful to me and are useful to me?
Yeah.
And allowing that those also will change and flex with new information and new experiences and new people that I talk to and new understandings about all of this stuff. For a long time, I've thought about religion or belief systems as this like prism. So we've got this white light of objective reality or truth that then is filtered through this prism of our reality in this world. And it filters into, all these different colors. And people find the color that speaks to them. People find the color that resonates with them. So if yellow is spirituality that has, flavors of Zen Buddhism or whatever, people will find that color, and that is how they get to know parts of what the truth is, how you get to tap into truth. And for some people, it is because of their personality, because of their genetics, because of their predispositions or whatever. They're more attracted to a more liturgical, structured religious system. But the danger is in us being like, my color over here is the only color and it's the right color. If you don't get into my color, then you don't have access to the capital T truth. Yeah. And now I believe that the only way that you really have access to capital T truth is when you realize that we're all humans in this experience together and nobody really knows what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it just reminded me of, in talking with people, that the more I heard from people, their personal experience, the more I was pretty sure that there were other perspectives that were equally as valuable as mine. And that was really helpful and not always easy to find that out. And not that, someone else's experience isn't more valid, but that like you said, in the color spectrum, like the way a person accesses truth and love and is equally as valuable and also really beautiful, even if I like to think my way is the best way.
I was just about to say, but my way is secretly the right way.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's so helpful to also allow that, to recognize that in myself,
Mm.
to be like, that's okay. That's okay if because the way that I think about it is the best way for me. And I like doing things my way, and that's okay.
It feels kind of the same as like somebody who is so good at a skill that I not only am not good at, but also don't enjoy. It'd be like if that person was like, this skill, this task is the best one, and everybody needs to do it because they're wired to like that and do it and participate in that way and be really good at it. And it is very narrow-minded and arrogant to assert that everybody else must, not must as in insists on them thinking the same way, but believing that everybody else thinks the same way that you do. So why can't you just
Mm,
do it the way that I'm doing it? You must, everybody else sees the world the same way that I do, right? I think that's one of the gifts for me of exiting too, is like really understanding that the way that I see the world in a lot of ways is unique to me, and that the way that the language that I have inside my mind, the body reactions that I have to my environment, the meaning that I give to words is so individualized that it's such an odd thing to just
mm,
assume that other people would have the same perspective on life that I do. When Annie died, my experience of her illness and of taking care of her and of her death is different because I'm the only one that had that relationship with her in that way. And to allow for the full range of other people's experiences in their interactions with her, in their beliefs about her disease, and in their experience of her death. And that's the challenge, I think, for us across all the experiences of life, is to know that each person is in it differently. And I don't need to insist that your experience of it is the same as mine, because that comes from a place of fear and
mm,
needing to have other people be like me. When love says, I want to know your experience because I want to know you. And when there's not a fear of the other person, when there really is like a genuine curiosity that's motivated by a deep understanding that, again, like that nobody has it figured out, that what that does is it also expands my experience, expands my awareness, expands my life perspective by being able to see the world through somebody else's eyes. But that can only happen when
mm.
you view another person not as an enemy, but as a co-conspirator in getting through life.
Yeah. The word I thought of when you were saying that was enriches.
Yeah.
I really think, yeah, hearing someone else's perspective, I mean, it allows you to see that full color spectrum,
Mm.
right? And yeah, and I also felt as you were talking too that it's so hard sometimes. I don't want to see
Mm.
someone else's way because I like my way.
Well, of course we don't
And
like it, because our brains are like, this burns more calories
yeah.
to think about things differently. It burns more calories for me to force myself to make new neural connections. On a physiological level, we don't like it. We don't like it. But I think um on a deeper level, that's what we really yearn for, right? So it's
Yeah.
almost like, oh, I see. It's almost like putting in the effort to get past that biological, instinctual part of our brain that says survival is the most important thing, to get that to that part of ourself, that deeper part of ourself that says the connection is the most important thing, like true authentic connection, where I see you and you see me, not the parts of us that we really work hard to present to other people, but like the real parts of us, the parts of us that are not so great, the parts of us that
Mm.
say my way is the right way, the parts of us that want, that want things to be a certain way and want to be comfortable and are selfish and all of that. And it's like, love allows us to see those parts, to address those parts of ourselves personally, but also in relationship. What do you think about God now, besides that it's a guy? Just kidding. Just
I
kidding.
haven't spent a lot of time thinking about my new version of God. That sounds
Hmm.
weird. I love that you asked me that because I haven't really thought about it.
Hmm. Well, I'll ask this.
Uh,
How long do you feel like you've been out?
well, I think my that visual I told you of really like finally releasing the idea that the religion we were raised in might not be absolute truth and that there might be something else, and then that allowing of like, oh, it doesn't matter. I would say that would be that releasing part would be like the really being out, I guess, a little over 10 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So
I wonder.
it was a long process,
Hmm.
a long leaving or leaving partially, but still not knowing how to, or not even necessarily wanting to let go.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
being really afraid of what that might mean.
What were you afraid that might mean? I mean, I know we're going back a decade here, but
No, that's okay. That I was committing to being okay with being on the outside always. That I was,
oh, interesting.
uh-huh. Yeah, I think that's the best way I can describe it. That once I finally let go, I knew that there was no way I could step back into that in the same way again.
Hmm.
And I couldn't unknow what I knew now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I was really hanging on to that, even that little tiny piece of maybe, because I was afraid that, yeah, that there would be no going back in the way that I felt I would need to call myself a Christian still.
Was it like I guess there's two different things here. Like one is this internal awareness of being able to look at the world differently now that you know you can't go back to a different to the way that you used to look at the world, but the real practical implications of that are how they affect your relationships, you know, and how that affects your friendships, your maybe your relationship with your spouse or your partner, with your children, with your parents. So I'm wondering, like, was that a big part of it for you, where knowing that, like, once you really let go of all of it, that you knew that that was going to change your community relationships in a way that felt really scary?
I think I had already moved away and I'd already um, left slash lost that community piece. So
Hmm.
it felt more of a letting go of myself and really being afraid of if there would be anything left.
It's like a not knowing, am I gonna be okay on the other side of this?
Yeah. It,
That's like that's identity death.
yep. And
Hmm.
I didn't know how to do that for, 10 years. It was a long time.
Hmm.
It was definitely a slow, you know, removing myself, like stopping going to church and things like that. But that final letting go took a long time to feel like I could. Yeah, I think even really knowing how is difficult.
Yeah.
Um, who will I be? Will I still be me?
Hmm.
What will that look like? What will that feel like? And like we talked about, really wondering if really being afraid of being in this uncertain spinning. I'm like, am I by letting go the final release of that? Am I committing to I was possible for me. I thought that I was committing to a lifetime of being untethered and just like floating in space,
That's totally the
which
visual that I
is
got,
scary.
was like you're in orbit and
Yes.
you're you know you're
Yes.
in the gravitational pull of that belief system, and then you're
Yes.
right on the edges of it and you can feel the gravity is not pulling so tight anymore. It's not pulling so tight. It's not pulling so tight. Are you willing to like doink, like put your thrusters on just a bit to like get out of that? And that's terrifying to think about it like that. And it does feel like that until you do it, and it feels different than I mean, in my experience, it felt night and day different than I thought it would feel.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, we're taught it will feel awful and,
mm-hmm.
that you'll be alone and you will have no guidance, all of that, you know?
So much of that is a result of relying on someone else to tell us who we are.
Yes.
I think that is like what a big part of the untethering is for us coming out of that was who's going to tell me who I am if not God or God's representatives like the Bible or pastors or their religious leaders. If they're not going to tell me who I am, how am I going to
Yeah.
who am I?
Who am I?
Right.
Yeah.
Am I anyone? Like
Yeah. And what is everything? So what is
mm.
am I good? Am I bad? Am I,
What
what
even
is
is
my
good?
purpose? What is even, yeah, it's like a quite scary. And I think I thought of this before and I thought of it on my walk today, as I was thinking about our conversation. But what is so great is after that final untethering, I talked about this period of time where I felt like I had to find a new
Mm.
planet, if you will, like a new
Hmm.
something. If this isn't the truth, there must be some other shining beacon of way of being, and looking for that and not finding it. And what is so fantastic was that I realized that my tethering is me. I wasn't gonna cry, but I'm so good at crying,
You are so
which
good
is
at it.
fine. Yeah, that I
Mm.
wasn't, floating in space, without anything holding
Oh,
me there.
you
Hmm.
oh, you are space.
Mm.
That's a weird way to, I guess, say it, but that space isn't scary when space is inside you, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. Like the
Yeah.
the exploration is safe because you're part of what you're exploring. Oh, yeah. Yeah, the
Mm.
exploration of who God is, the exploration of who we are, the exploration of other humans is safe because that is us.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to underestimate how, for so many people, how strong that gravitational pull is because there is significant risk for many, many people in leaving their belief system. So there are people that will lose their jobs, their relationships, their family support, their community support when they exit.
Yeah.
But this is my encouragement to any of you who are either like feeling the fear as you're on the edges of that tether and wondering if you're going to be okay. This is my encouragement is that on the other side of this, there is new community that awaits you. There are people who have gone through what you're going through that can remind you that you are safe. And there are other support systems that are awaiting you after that happens. But it is, I don't want to downplay how very scary that is for so many people.
Mm.
And not just internally, it is really scary to go through like an existential kind of angst or awakening with that, but it also on a lot of like really practical levels can be very, very difficult for many people. So just if you happen to be in that spot, any of you just know, whew, there's light ahead, and there are people ahead that are going to be your best friend or your next partner or your next spiritual friend. There are jobs ahead of you that align with you in ways that you didn't know to expect. So just
Mm.
the fear, the practical fear and the psychological fear is very real. And it is very, very difficult to press ahead in the face of those things. Um, but it's worth it. It's worth it. Like the peace and the joy and the connection that I feel with other people and within myself and with source, God, universe,
Mm.
whatever is like nothing I ever experienced within that belief system.
Yeah, I agree. There's a I feel like a settling,
Mm.
like it feels better.
Mm.
The process does not feel better,
Oh
but
God, the process sucks.
so bad. But
Hurts so good. It's like working out, like doing, oh man, working out is the worst. And afterwards, oh, it feels so good. It feels so good
yeah.
afterwards. It's like the I guess it's having an understanding that sometimes the things that are the hardest yield the most spectacular results. And it's really about like the intention behind it and the commitment to choosing to pursue a life that feels really good and that feels so aligned with like who you are at your core that it makes it worth it to go through the really painful experiences to get to be
hmm
that.
Yay. Yay for us.
What a gift for one of the things that I think and feel and say the most is the phrase, I don't know.
Mm,
Like I don't know.
yeah.
And that feels okay. It feels okay to not know because in saying I don't know, that means there's more to learn. And
hmm
that's always exciting. There's nothing more to learn if you're like, oh yeah, I know. I've got this locked in. I've got this dialed in. And that also is an illusion.
Yeah.
What has been like as you're talking about like that you are, oh, I can't remember the phrase that you used, but I'll refer to Glennon Doyle's description of being her own touch tree.
hmm
So can you explain like what that is? And then I just want to talk briefly about what that means to be our own touch tree.
Oh, yeah. Do you want me to talk about her,
Sure. Yeah.
what I
Just
remember
share.
of her?
Yep.
Yeah. So being our own touch tree is that uh, we have so much wisdom and capacity to know ourselves deeply. And when we are faced with a decision or a situation and it's not clear what we can do or should do or we want to do, to instead of searching for outside opinion, so instead of being like, oh, I'm going to ask this person or I'm going to see over here because maybe they know, it is a going in and inward and really feeling what that question is, feeling, the situation and finding the answer within ourselves. And I believe she talks about the idea of a touch tree, of being in a forest and venturing out, to get food or to see other people and having a very special tree in the forest that person knows very well. And at any point, they are able to find that particular tree, that touch tree, so they know where to come home to.
Hmm.
And
So they orient themselves around that one
yes,
familiar,
yes,
sturdy, stable, never moving
yes.
reality.
And again, I think too, not that it isn't helpful to ask other people their opinion
Hmm.
or to, get advice, but that we we are really such vibrant, magical beings, and
Hmm.
we have the answer already within ourselves, and that we can find it there. And I think it takes practice in doing that. I think especially for those of us who have we're taught to never trust ourselves. And even those of us that have, I think that it is a practice of sitting with ourselves, sitting with our feelings and what we know. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's trying stuff and seeing what works and
Hmm.
what doesn't. But yeah, I love the idea of really looking inward to find direction, to find guidance as far as what I want to do and how I want to move forward. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Okay, so I want to play devil's advocate a little bit here and say that the argument against this idea that you can find truth within yourself and you can trust yourself would be people would say, yeah, like some people have certain beliefs that are disproven by science. So what is it that we're actually trying to encourage people to do when we say you are your
Mm.
own touch tree? It's not so much about maybe even like things in our physical world, but like what are we trying to encourage people to do? Like what do we actually mean by saying you can trust yourself,
Mm.
that you have the answers?
I would say in looking for what I want, what I care about, even something like what outfit I'm gonna wear
Hmm.
today. So like these would be decisions that I would make. They could be seemingly small or big. Who am I gonna marry? How,
Hmm.
what job do I want to have? Instead of giving more weight to opinions and the feelings and the thoughts outside of myself, being my own touch tree means that I practice and work on thinking about what I like, what I
Hmm.
want, what brings me joy, what is delightful to me, and I practice paying attention to those things, and then I honor what those things are, regardless if somebody thinks they're valuable or not.
Hmm.
So, how I want to spend my day off. There could be lots of opinion about what I should be doing with my day off, like
Yeah.
make sure you're running the air, blah, whatever. Okay. But instead of like having that be my guide, I have myself to say how I like to spend my time. And the things that are important to me are I want to go on a walk. I want
Hmm.
to rest. I want to read. I want to play a game with my kids. Placing I guess, giving the value of my deepest desires and
Hmm.
my what I want, let that guide those types of decisions.
Hmm. I like that a lot. Like it's more of a call to turn the gaze inward when it comes to more abstract thought and questions. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not talking about, physics or whatever, the space exploration or whatever. It's more about where do I want to put my focus?
Yeah.
What things do I want to pay attention to? How am I feeling about these things? And addressing the inner reality and the inner responses to what's happening externally. I appreciate that distinction so much because I mean, one of the things that I got pushback on when I exited was like I had people asking me right away questions like, "Do you think that murder is wrong?" And I was like, "Yes, I think murder is wrong." Like it goes back to that same question of like I don't have to have this structure for me to have a moral compass or to have values and compassion in the world. Like I have a belief that if I harm other people, I harm myself because I believe we're connected. And it's like it's asking those more kind of like ethereal abstract questions and letting that internal guidance rule instead of these like bigger like systematic questions or whatever that's like, yeah, I mean, don't follow your gut if your gut is telling you gravity doesn't exist and you can go do something foolish that would prove that gravity still is in effect.
Yeah.
But to use that as like a compass to find and follow what is delightful and
Mm-hmm.
what sparks even more curiosity and connection. Oh man, what a fun conversation today.
Thank you.
Yeah, we went so deep on this. And I really appreciate that. I think many people who come out of organized religion or a high demand religion have a lot of negative things to say about their experiences. And those are all completely valid. And I've had my fair share of negative experiences within that.
Mm-hmm.
What I appreciate about our conversation is that we're talking about what it's like on the other side.
Mm.
And we're not ignoring some of the like negative byproducts of being in that belief system for a long time, but really more so focused on like how do I continue to move forward in love and pursue compassion and connection with other people outside of this, and not spending a ton of time like this is all the things that are wrong with this. There's a lot of really beautiful, wonderful things about religious communities and some of those structures. There's a lot of harm that has been dealt out as a result of that as well. But I always enjoy talking with you. Like, I feel like we always end up more so talking about now and the future,
Mm,
and the type of people that we want to continue to become, and how we want to continue to love others well, than we do about any of the
mm-hmm.
that stuff. So what a pleasure.
Thank you.
I love you so much.
I love you so
And
much.
for all of our listeners out there, before we go, yes, we expire.